So I was born in Oahu, raised on Maui, went to St. Anthony High School on Maui. Went to church for religion and all that. Never really did the Sunday school church because I never really believed in God. It was more, he was there, but I wasn't sure about him. But I would pray to him when, things went wrong. So he was a little bit of the punishing God and some of the Santa Claus God. When things went wrong, I'd pray. When things were good, it was just life.
I really believe that Jesus loved me, and I had a profound understanding of that as a child, but I couldn't reconcile the abuse that occurred, and there was some of that with me growing up, so I had a really hard time figuring out how it could be that God could love me so much, but I could suffer.
Just before high school is when I started getting in trouble. Started partying, started drinking and using and doing things that probably shouldn't have done. And I got into a lot of trouble then.
I got in lots of trouble when I was younger. And I had a difficult time finding my way. And the way that I found to find acceptance was through drugs and alcohol. And I didn't fit in very well living on Maui with my dad. I was one of 5 white kids at school, and they believed in Kill Holiday. So I found substances relieve some of those pressures. And I met my ex-husband, and we hung out together, and one thing led to another, and I became pregnant at 18.
Did some stupid things in the military, went to the brig, got discharged from the military, came back to Maui, started working as a welder, was drinking during lunchtime one day and drove home that day and got into a head-on collision, almost killing a lady. That's like the dark time of my life. So I was sentenced to go to jail on December 27th, and I decided that night, Christmas Eve, I was like, oh, maybe I should go to church and pray to God. Maybe he can help me to get out of this or something. I don't know, the Santa Claus prayers, And so I ended up going to church and, worshiping. I was drinking before I went to church, but I still went to church and hung out and ended up going to jail on the 27th.
So my grandmother came from California to visit me, my grandparents did, and I remember her sitting in the hospital with me. I'd just given birth to Ben. So she said that I needed to marry Ben's father, that we didn't have any illegitimate children in our family, and that if I chose not to, that she would disown me. And I had a really hard time with that because if I was going to have any help from my family, it would be through my grandmother. So either I married my ex-husband or I would be disowned.
So I got out of prison. I was still on probation, and I was still drinking and using, and got in trouble because of that. And they're the ones that sent me to drug and alcohol rehab.
And when Ben was about 8 months old, my ex-husband wanted me to move to the beach with an infant because we didn't have a place to go. And I'd already lived on the beach, and I wasn't willing to do that with a baby. So I went back to California for a little while to be with my grandparents. And eventually he followed, and shortly afterwards then I got pregnant with my second child.
So during that drug and alcohol rehab, they stress a lot that you need to find a power greater than yourself, your own understanding of God. And I had a really hard time with that. The God that I grew up with wasn't there for me anymore. To me, he was the punishing scorekeeper God. You do something good, you do something bad, he's keeping score. And I was losing that scorekeeping, because I was not doing the right things. So I had a hard time believing in God.
I was making a conscious choice not to be close to God. I thought that I was so dirty that God wouldn't accept me at that point, that I'd done enough damage that I moved far enough away that I couldn't come back. So finally, I had reached a breaking point. My daughter was small and really sick, and I didn't have the ability to care for her. And so I had prayed that a desperate prayer, which is, God, if you're out there, please do something. And it was almost instantaneous that God showed up. I think it was the very next day, my ex-husband's mom called me and said that she would help me with the kids and help me relocate to Hawaii and care for them. And so I had a small belief that if I had given her the children at that time, that she probably would not give them back without a fight. And it was true. She never actually relinquished custody of the children again then. So I got sober in 1988 and changed my life around. My life was kind of settled, so I decided that I would file for divorce from my ex-husband. We'd been married for 13 years, and I tried a couple of times to make that work, and he just continued to drink and use and fool around, and I just couldn't live that way. So the only way she was going to give me my children back is if he was in the picture. And I knew that if he was in the picture that I wouldn't be able to stay sober. So I filed for a divorce, and at that time she filed for intervenership, saying that I was unfit. And we went to court, and it took about 1.5 years. And the judge finally said that he couldn't decide, and that I would have to go through that whole court process all over again. And I remember thinking that it was as if we were ripping the children apart, and so I chose to let them have physical and legal custody of the children, and I told the judge that at that time. And I was so angry with God. And I thought that because I'd gotten sober to be a mom to my kids, that I would get them back like other people do. And what I realized at that time was that I did get them back, but just not in the capacity that I had thought. And that I got to develop really good relationships with my kids and be really available for them and listen to them and meet them where they were at, instead of what I might have had they lived with me.
Staying clean and sober and doing the correct kind of things, life started to change, the good things started happening. And I could see how God was working in my life, how he would, as long as I did the footwork, he would come through in the end. And the more I trusted in him, it came true. I now work for the federal government. I have a felony, and I got hired to work for the federal government, and that's just a miracle in itself. Right after I got out of treatment, one of my friends and her friends brought us together at a picnic, and that's pretty much where we connected.
So on our wedding day, I was worried because I thought it would be raining, and it had been storming for many days. And as it turned out, as I looked out the window, it was still misting a little bit, but it wasn't storming like it had been. And I was pretty amazed, because when I went downstairs, the sun was shining brightly, and the chairs weren't wet, and the grass wasn't wet, and it was almost as if God showed up just to shine the light on us so that we could get married. It was an indication to me, I think, that we were supposed to. Yeah. So my son Benjamin had difficulty living with his grandparents and really wanted to live with me. And because we couldn't really reconcile that really well, he found drugs and alcohol as a solution to deal with his problems. And he found some kids down in Waikiki to hang out with, and they became his surrogate family. Most of these kids were homeless, and they all liked drinking and using together, and beating tourists up and stealing money and like that. To make sure that he was okay, I would go down, and when Verne was in town, he would come with me, and we would feed the kids in Waikiki. We'd take them out to eat, and so Ben could bring a couple of his friends whenever he wanted. So several of those kids called me Mom, and I did that for a number of years. When I look back at what's been most difficult was the loss of Benjamin when he passed away in 2009. Even though that was a really dark time, I knew that it was a time for me to examine the woman that I was, and the mother I had been, and the mother that I am still. And God's blessed Verne and I with an opportunity to help influence one of Ben's very good friends, and have brought him into our home and call him our own. And so God made a way for us to be able to have a second chance, and not replace Benjamin by any means, but to enhance our lives and the quality of our Hanai son's life too.
To make the positive out of the bad that has happened to me, you know, the car accident brought me to realize that I was going down the wrong path. Going to treatment and things like that led me to a better understanding of God. Without any of those disasters in our life, I don't think I wouldn't have changed.
And somebody asked me the other day if I was angry at God for taking Ben, and that never happened for me. And the reason it never happened for me is because when he was so sick, and we had 2 weeks, and he didn't have any medical, he was indigent, they didn't know what was wrong with him, and we were able to get him a Social Security card, we were able to get him on Medicare. So I know that God was there every step of the way, and even though it was really, really hard, it was very obvious to me that it was exactly the way it was supposed to be. And I think sometimes that's the thing for me, is that sometimes life is really hard and it isn't what we want it to be, but that's where the blessings come. I think that what it boils down to is that when we trust God and we do the next indicated thing, no matter how hard it is, and I trust that there's something in it, that there's a reason, and maybe the reason is not for me, maybe the reason is for someone else. I think the best is yet to come, in that, you know, I'm soon to graduate, and you got promoted to the first assistant engineer on the ship, right? Huge promotion, right? And now we have Kaka'ako in our lives, and we get to help love and nurture him.
For me, the best is yet to come would be that I get a second chance to help someone better their life. It would be Kaka'ako coming into our life. Kaka'ako is very open, and he's finding his way to finding the Lord, and to me that's a very big blessing. I mean, I'm surprised how well he's taken going to church, and, you know, standing on the side and talking to Pastor Max all the time and things like that. You know, he's even talking, he wants to go surfing with Neil and things like that. And I think that's a far cry from running the streets of Waikiki and, you know, doing the other stuff. That this is a huge chance for us to help someone else better their life too. And for me, that's the best.